Welcome to the Libra Solar Festival. Today our guest is Malvin Artley. I will unmute Malvin now. Hello, Malvin.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you. Good. Thank you so much for joining us today and stepping in. We are entering the period of the Libra full moon. Today is the first day of the 5 days, and it's a special time during the month, but also a special time in this year cycle. And so, Malvin, you are as a double Libra, probably most qualified to bring our group focus to the opportunities and challenges of Libra. And considering everything that's happening now in the world, that's definitely the qualities that we all need. So please, the floor is yours, and I will just transfer the screen sharing option, making you a presenter.
Okay.
Okay, so now you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, so I'll just start this now. Hello everyone, just to give you a little bit of background, as you can, I'm sure you can tell by now, I wasn't born in Italy. I was born and raised in the southern US in North Carolina. And my life has taken me to Australia for years and now to Italy for the past couple of years. So I've seen a little bit of the world, and the world as it stands now in a sort of a precarious situation, given the conflicts in the Middle East especially, and with the U.S. elections coming up. With that, we'll get right to the outline of the talk here. This brief period, we'll do our best to have a look at the nature of Libra and its significance in the zodiac. The rulers of Libra, the orthodox, the esoteric, and group rulership, which is also known as the hierarchical rulership. The relation of Libra to the other zodiacal signs, because this is important in terms of significance and fellow servers. We'll also look at the need for balance and nature of the conscious choice and the difference between conscious choice and reasoned choice. There is a difference. And there'll be some practical information in terms of that. How to get to a conscious choice instead of being, as we say, stuck in the head or the emotions, and the road to that, because Libra, above all else, governs first balance and then the process of conscious choice to enable a better spiritual direction, a better spiritual outlook on life from moment to moment. Then after that, we'll look at the decisions facing the globe at the moment and the need for a calm and balanced interplay between people, groups, and nations. Then we'll have some questions, and then meditation, and the conclusion of the session. So, moving to the nature of Libra and its significance in the zodiac, we know that Libra is signified by the scales, or the balancing scales. And it covers a period from the 22nd of September to 22nd of October. So we're a little bit over halfway through the sign as it goes. It transmits the third ray, especially through Saturn, but in terms of its general overall expression, it transmits this ray as well. And this is the quality of active intelligence and the more philosophical, mathematical type of mind as it relates to humanity. The sign, as we see here, is related to Gemini, but it's also related to 4 other signs, which we'll get to here very shortly. It's a sign on the carbon cross, so it's an energy or a sign that's very much created, that's very much dealing with self-created opportunities and self-initiation or initiative that comes from within the person, not so much in terms of fixity like you would have with Taurus or Leo, for instance, or with the more mutable signs that are so prone to change like Sagittarius and Gemini. The developmental phrase associated with the sign is, and the word said, let choice be made. This is the lower expression of Libra, and Librans are renowned for not being able to make a choice. The truth of the matter is otherwise, and in the lower phase of Libra it takes a long choice sometimes, but we usually do make some kind of a choice. The completion phase, which is exhibited more when the Libra is on the spiritual path, is I choose the way that leads between the 2 great lines of force. The 2 great lines of force in this way can be seen as the pairs of opposites, or the forces of materialism and the forces of spirituality. We're looking also at the personality and the higher self or the soul. Being more of a universalist, I'll use terms interchangeably. The light conferred is the light that moves to rest. As we see here, it's the light that oscillates until a point of balance is achieved. The lower expression of Libra is one of extremes, from swinging from one extreme of the pendulum swing to the other. And it can be the most extreme of the signs for anyone who knows a given number of Librans. We don't generally find too many Librans that are that balanced. A balance is achieved through a lot of self-effort, as it turns out, and we'll get that in a little bit. So as we see, it's light which is distinguished by moving up and down. Moving up and down means between the higher self and the personality. The hierarchy that Libra rules is the triple flowers, and these are the prototypes of the solar angels, or the soul on its own plane. It's associated with nirvana, which is the highest aspect of the triple flowers, and it transmits the force mind through Saturn. The common emphasis in Libra is decision-making, human love, the law, sex, and money. You can read all these things here. I won't go through everything. But in the lowest aspect, the sign gives a great variability and imbalance, bias, prejudice, dull stupidity, a lying nature, a showy outer form, intrigue, and materialistic attitudes. When we get to the change of direction, or the reversal on the wheel, as we sometimes call it, when the Libra decides to lead a more spiritual life, the aim is contemplation, which is related to the incarnated soul and the mental unit, and it produces eventually a balance between the pairs of opposites. This is brought through by the force of desire. The cycle of progress on the path is the balancing of desire, which results in a decision, a careful weighing of the various aspects of oneself and the situation we find ourselves in, the power to project the inner spiritual purpose of the intended will into physical expression. It's said that one of the best examples of a Libran type we can see in Helena Blavatsky, who wrote The Secret Doctrine and founded the Theosophical Society. And looking at her chart, you don't see Libra anywhere, but there is a Libran emphasis with her. The liberation achieved is a type of shamatha, which is calm abiding, and it's said to be very difficult of achievement. We'll have a look at that in a minute. These things that I have put up here on the screen are from my book, The Full Moons. So this is coming from one of the appendices. The Associated Full Moon Festival doesn't really have a name, but we could call it the Festival of Balance or the Festival of Decision. And as it turns out, every 49 years in the Libran interval, the masters or the initiates who are going on to the sixth initiation make great decisions which have far-reaching outcomes for the world. And we recently had one of these back around the turn of the century. What we have seen since then is evidenced by 9/11, by the wars in the Middle East, especially the rise of the neocons in the U.S. and all the trouble that has caused in various parts of the world. Moving on from that, what we see with this idea of contemplation becomes very clear when we look at a very famous Buddhist diagram here, which is the shamatha diagram, or the 9 stages of calming the mind. And as it turns out, each of these elephants representing the mind, as we see going along this winding path here, represents the 9 signs from Aries through to Sagittarius. In Aries, which is commencement, we begin to train the mind, but the mind is like the mad monkey who runs around and leads the elephant astray everywhere, in every direction. And the monk seen here has our volition, our higher self, who is trying to gain control of the instrument. The Libra phase is represented by this elephant here, which we can see has a little bit of black in it, and the black represents the lack of control. The white elephant represents the evolution of wisdom within the mind stream, or our ability to access it. So we can see that this expression through Libra is a fairly almost pure expression, leading up to the time of initiation is represented in Sagittarius, and the completion of the rainbow bridge, with the succeeding stages of Capricorn, which is initiation, Aquarius, which is world service or bringing back the wisdom to the rest of the world, and finally Pisces, which is complete liberation from we should say, the gravity of the world. So it's a very interesting diagram in that respect, and it's quite descriptive of the stages of the meditative path. Having some background in Buddhism, this is something that has become very clear to me as I've studied these things. We see the Libra interval of shamatha here, which is classification. And it's only when we have thoroughly pacified the mind that we are able to truly contemplate. We can't do that when we're continually buffeted by the emotions, or what we have to buy for dinner, or the problems our kids are having, any of the thousands of things that beset us every day and upset our equilibrium. The rulers of Libra pretty much tell the story of the sign. We'll go through these. The three rulers are Venus, which is the orthodox ruler, Uranus, which is the esoteric ruler, and Saturn, which is the hierarchical ruler. We won't go through the initial dignities here. There's not really the time, and they're not important to this discussion. The nature and function of Venus if we look at the human constitution, we find in this area right here. And this is the connecting point between the lower mind and the higher mind, and it's involved very much with the building of the Antakarana, or the Rainbow Bridge. It has to do with the integration of the personality, and Venus is very much connected with the Ajna center, or the center between the eyebrows. This is in distinction to the third eye, which is found in the forehead, and is actually the functioning of the three major head centers. But with the Venus experience, we have all the goings on in the lower personality attempted to be drawn up into the higher mind for resolution, for calming of the personal aspects, until we can reach this point where the light of the higher self, represented here, can pour down into via the Antakarana into the higher mind, and eventually be worked out by the lower mind. Uranus, on the other hand, actually in a way represents all of this, because Uranus transmits the seventh ray, which is very much connected with the physical plane. And by this we see also the cosmic physical plane. Uranus transmits the spiritual will. It's the that comes as a sudden flash of insight, or a sudden shock as the personality experiences it. It is the united functioning of all of these aspects of the human being. Saturn has a particular relationship with consciousness, with the spiritual or the atmic plane. And this is the highest aspect of the triple flowers, the triple aspect of the higher self. We'll get a little bit more to Saturn here in a minute. So we see these rulers laid out here, Venus, Saturn. Uranus, I use the pronunciations interchangeably. Uranus transmits the seventh ray and is the urge to better conditions, meaning better spiritual conditions. Saturn transmits the third ray, or the ray of higher intelligence, and Venus transmits the fifth ray, or the ray of concrete knowledge or science. So we see we have three hardline rays represented by Libra, and Libra in and of itself hardly seems like a hard ray sort of emphasis when it's expressed personally, but we're not actually looking at personal concerns at this point. We see that with these three rays, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, we have a very powerful possibility for manifestation, and Librans are said to be some of the best manifestors of all the 12 signs when they're functioning as initiates, and we see that through the work of people like Blavatsky. As far as the signs go, Venus relates Libra to Taurus, Gemini, and Capricorn, as we see. And when we talk about Libra being concerned with law, sex, and money, we see the associations here. Taurus with the animal kingdom and natural law, Libra with the vegetable kingdom and the sexual nature and natural affinity, Capricorn with the mineral kingdom, money, and the concrete expression of the law supply. Venus also relates Taurus to Gemini through Venus, which is the higher ruler of Gemini, through duality, condition, and interplay, which is usually what we see in the lower aspect of Libra, the sense of duality and the sense of interplay between people. Uranus relates Libra to Aries and Aquarius. Uranus brings concretion to energy and thus rules money in the higher sense. So Uranus relates spiritual will to material substance, and in that respect is able to create form according to the spiritual need. There's a very close relationship between Libra and Aries, especially through the Uranian rulership of these two signs. It also relates Libra very closely with Aquarius. The Aries-Libra pairing with Uranus creates this dynamic wherein the spiritual need must be self-initiated through Aries. With every pairing of signs, you have this idea of balance, opposition, and of greatly extended insight as a result of realizing the qualities of one's opposite sign, usually meaning the sun sign. The relation to Aquarius brings Libra firmly into the realm of service, because Uranus through Aquarius gives the ability to objectify spiritual energy, to make spiritual energy adaptable, practical at a very physical level. Aquarius pours forth the water of wisdom to everyone according to their need. It's the sign of the world server. And lastly, Saturn relates Libra to Capricorn, which is attainment, basically, especially in terms of Buddhism. Attainment is associated with initiation, with the evolution of the great psychic powers of the cities, with synthesis and with initiation in general. I keep losing my pointer here. Okay. So I'm a little bit out of order here. Okay. Now, given these facts, we see that Libra can be very powerful in terms of creating a point of focus wherein things can actually happen. Now, in the natural zodiac, Libra rules the 7th house, the natural 7th house, and this is the house of law, of litigation, of open enemies, and of the just distribution of energy, basically. And this is where we see the balance of law, sex, and money. Aside from that, given the 3 hardline rays that Libra trans, there is a need for balancing that with the softer energies of 2, 4, and 6. And this is where Venus becomes sort of a bridging planet between the lower and the higher expressions in Libra. Okay. Now Libra has been said to be the sign that represents the reversal of the wheel. What that means is that for long eons of time, for many, many lifetimes, probably thousands of lifetimes, we're more focused on the material planes. We're more concerned with our basic survival instincts, with getting our desires met, not so much our needs met, and with development of the mental faculties slowly as we go along. Eventually we get to the point where the personality is so strong and so effective in the world that a crisis comes, because that sort of expression begins to go against what the soul actually is trying to do in the world, and that is to be of greater service. So with this in mind, there's a crisis that comes about which forces a decision upon the Libran type, and that crisis will usually revolve around a relationship of some sort, as I've seen it. Because often what happens, especially with Libran types, is they'll find themselves in a relationship that inhibits their spiritual expression, and they'll have to make a decision as to whether or not to stay in the relationship or to pursue a more service-oriented path. In this way, the Libran experience becomes a real testing ground in relationships. The aim here is how to balance the life so that you can make the proper choice, because usually usually in personal life our choices are governed by what we desire, what we think is supposed to be the right path forward. We try to prescribe our outcomes. We have certain set ideas about the way things should be. This is the lower mind combined with the emotions trying to wrest out some sort of a destiny or a path in the world, and it's not usually the best suited to one's higher purpose. To be a proper soul-infused personality means that one needs to be able to move with energy very fluidly, to be able to respond in a moment's notice to any need, and be able to render in a way that the other person needs, not so much what we think they need. To be able to do this, we need to be able to stand still in any moment, to be at a point where the higher knowledge that we need is able to more or less drop into the mind, rather than us trying to constantly figure out what we need to do. In that regard, the Chinese have, or the Orientals in general, have certain things they can give us in that regard. So I'll just get to that page. To start with, the Oriental system uses 5 elements instead of 4. These are fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. The difference between the 5 element system and the 4 element system that we're used to are the wood and the metal, but there's not really that much difference. The fire, earth, and water are the same. The metal relates to air, and wood relates to ether. There are 2 basic cycles related with this. Just go over this very quickly. There's a generating cycle which goes around the circle. In other words, water nurtures wood, wood feeds fire, fire creates ash or earth, metal can be derived from earth, and Metal produces the channel waves for water. There's also a controlling cycle. Fire melts metal, metal cuts wood, wood binds the earth, earth forms channels for water or blocks water through dams, and water puts out fire. So there's what can be a very complicated system set up within the human energetic system related to these elements, but they all have to be balanced. And as we see, each of these elements has a whole host of associations. Now, in Oriental systems, all these things have to be balanced in order for the life to proceed easily, without any illness, and in line with one's inner purpose. So we see there are 5 tastes: bitter, sweet, spicy, salty, acidic. We see that there are certain energies from imbalances, certain transformations, strengths, weaknesses, anything you could possibly imagine. I don't know what's happened to my orders here, but we'll get back there. Sorry for this. Okay. The way we get to being able to make a conscious choice is by balancing the 5 activity levels. And this is something I've experienced over many years. So we have to balance our times of contentment, our times of spiritual practice, our times of work, our times of physical activity, and our quiet time. The quiet time relates primarily to sleep. That's the best way to get the quiet time, but you can also spend it by just sitting quietly. The physical relates to exercise and attention to the body, including eating. Work relates to one's occupation. Most all of us have to work. The spiritual relates to meditation and our spiritual practices. Contentment relates to time with loved ones and leisure time. Now the point to all this is that we have to engage in these every day, not necessarily in equal amounts of time, but our focus in those times has to be complete. So in other words, while we're doing meditation or our spiritual practices, we're not thinking about what we want to eat next, or what movie we want to see in a couple of days, or things of that nature. In the physical, we're not thinking about work. We're doing physical things. And in quiet time, we don't carry our cares into bed with us. We finish the day and go to sleep. What happens over time is that once these things come into balance, we begin to move through life effortlessly. We can change from one situation to the next without any bother, without any carryover. And in the end, what happens is when we find ourselves in a crisis, we're there in the moment, totally in the moment, and whatever we need drops into the mind. We don't have to sit there and think about, oh, what should I do because this and this and this has happened. We know automatically what we should do, and it often can run into a course that seems counterintuitive, but it always turns out to be the right choice. This is what we mean by making a conscious choice, because we're fully conscious in the moment. Instead, in the West, we like to think that we make reasoned choices, that we think things through, that we make a good decision based on all the information we have on hand. The problem with that is we don't always have all the information. or there are things that we don't see clearly, so on and so forth. If we have to make a decision, something very important, like for instance life-threatening, like we find ourselves near a fire or something, we don't have time to think. What we want to do is to be sure that we have brought ourselves to a place where we can make these decisions without having to think about them. I recently, well, I won't say recently, but some years ago I had an experience like this, in that I was walking down the street with a couple of friends, and I heard someone yelling at the door, "Help, help, there's a fire in my house, there's a fire in my house." And we all went running into this poor woman's house, and there was a fire on the stove, and my two friends were running around looking for fire extinguishers, something to put this out. And I just stood there and looked for a second, picked up the lid of the pan, put it on the pan, and the fire was out, and they looked at me like I had done something incredible. But leading up to this, I'd been practicing the balance of the 5 energy levels, and I just knew what to do without having to think about it, even though the situation potentially could have been very dangerous. I could probably tell you several other examples, but what we see is, with this sort of attitude, is the person who in a moment of crisis doesn't think of the self, knows exactly what to do. There's no panic. There's a sense of calmness that comes over the person, and the volition is taken up from what we call another source. What we actually know it as is the soul itself that takes over, and we render the service there in the moment. So this is a more or less a very brief presentation of the balance needed to really bring through the soul's force. But when we can move in this effortless manner and be totally focused in any given time, true force of Libra can come through, in that the higher self in times of need, in times of crisis, is always connected with the lower aspects of the mind. In that regard, we move on to the world, because we don't have a lot of time here. I keep losing my pointer. Where's my pointer? Okay. What we see in this picture are the ongoing world conflicts in the world right now. The dark orange spots on the map we see are Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. These are where the heaviest fighting is going on. If we look a bit further than that, we also look at the rank of countries by oil production, and what do you know? These are areas that are very much connected with oil production. The problem behind these conflicts is really multifaceted. I mean, we see a lot in the media, especially the alternative media, about the global oil cartels, the banking situations, or people who want to control the world's wealth. And what we see working out as a result of these wars is that, especially in Syria, Russia has stepped in and put a halt to a lot of the Mideast policy that has brought about a lot of these conflicts to start with. What we're going to see over a period of time is that as the disastrous policies, really disastrous, of the U.S. and its allies through these countries has produced will have to be reversed somewhat, or have to be seriously rethought. What we've seen in recent days is a situation in Syria wherein we find ourselves on the brink of a water war, basically. We had a ceasefire there, especially around Aleppo, and it was broken by the U.S. and its allies. The Russians have responded by placing a no-fly zone there and threatened to shoot down any unauthorized aircraft that comes into the area. So there's been a lot of dangerous rhetoric that's come up. The Western press is full of anti-Russian propaganda. That being said, there are no angels in this conflict. Russia is protecting its own oligarchs, its own interests in the region. It's trying to put a stronger face on itself. Putin has brought the country back from the disheveled state that it was in after the Soviet Union collapsed. And what we see eventuating through this is the two major powers, Russia and the U.S., coming head to head, and the two souls of the nations being brought out. It's very interesting that it's been brought out in the Middle East, and especially between the conflicts, or the perceived conflicts, between Christianity and Islam, the two great six-ray religions that we see actually starting to wane in influence as the six-ray goes out, because what we see gradually is a secularization of society, and the reaction against that, especially in places like the U.S. and the Salafists, Saudi Arabia, trying to maintain the grip on the extreme aspects of the religion. What we have is a very potent mix at the moment, and what we need to do is to muster all the conscious choice and the focus that we can, and bring light into this planet to dissolve these conflicts. What we'll eventually see is an enforced cooperation between nations. This idea that there will be a new Cold War, it's a notion I don't necessarily agree with. I think what we'll see instead is a reevaluation in policy in the U.S., especially as the election comes up. And in the U.S., it doesn't really matter who is elected from what I can see in the astrology, because the next administration is going to face a lot of obstacles. It's going to be a real mess over there for the next 2 years especially, and it'll be very interesting to see how the Congress changes with this election and the election in 2 years. The main thing that faces the American public, and the thing that will change American policy, is to change the Congress. It's not about the presidential race, it's about the Congress, and resolving the deadlock there and bringing in a more progressive outlook, one that has been hijacked by the far right in the U.S. These are the major things that I see. We also have problems with the environment, but we're gradually coming around to accords on that, with China recently signing the environmental accords, and the U.S. gradually coming on board once we can get past all the denial of climate change. There's just so much here. Again, the main thing we need is for this combined for everyone who can do it to bring through an untrammeled light from the higher self and from all beings associated with the higher self and beyond to influence the leaders of the world and, well, basically everybody to begin at the grassroots and to change the governments or to put pressure on the governments to relinquish these old policies that we've seen and move up further into the coming Aquarian age, which will gradually show itself as the next decades in this century progress. We actually have a lot to look forward to in the coming years, especially in the coming centuries, but these next decades are going to be a little bit testy, should we say, but I don't really have any great fears for the planet. The biggest thing right now is to get past this impasse in Syria, to work things out in Africa, and to basically come first to a stalemate between the U.S. and Russia, and then to a greater sense of cooperation based on the perceived need of the world. We've been about an hour, so do we need to open this up for questions?
Yeah, I think it's a good moment for us to open the floor for comments or questions coming from our audience. And thank you, Malvin, for this presentation. Very important points, at least for myself, that I could derive from that regarding the balance. But just want to encourage our participants to join the discussion, and in order to do that, you can use the function raise your hand. It's a button on the control panel, and as you will raise your hand, I will unmute you so you will be able to speak. And also you can write your questions in the question section of the control panel, and I will read those. It usually takes a bit of time to for our participants to put their question up front. So there is one question coming from Julie, or a comment. I have never understood the term choice. Do we really have choice, or is it the soul which is always in control? Thank you.
I missed the last part, the soul which is always...
I will pose the question in the chat window that everyone could see it, and we'll repeat it just in a moment.
Okay.
So now you can read it in chat. I have never understood the term choice. Do we really have choice, or is it the soul which is always in control?
That's a very good question, actually. This relates directly to the relationship between karma and Saturn. Saturn being the Lord of Karma in astrology. Yes, we do have choice. But the thing to realize is that because we make choices in the present moment, those have consequences often far into the future. Those consequences in the future are what we come back life after life after life to work out. And until we finally learn to make a conscious choice, instead of using the reasoning mind or the emotions, hopefully we don't add any more to the karma in this life, but sometimes we add more to it. Sometimes we do manage to make conscious choices, And when we make a conscious choice, we end a certain karma that is represented by the crisis that comes up. It's a rather complicated matter, but to sum it up, yes, we do have choice, and we have to be very careful about the choices we made, because our present situation is determined by choices that we have made in the past, along with the choices that others around us have made in the past. We reincarnate in groups. We don't reincarnate individually. So the people we're working things out with now, whether that's a family or a group or even a nation, the people we're doing that with now, we have done or made choices around in the past. It's said that there is no phenomena that arises in and of itself. That everything has a cause in the past that brings results in the present and into the future. And some of the karma that we work out is very ancient, but most of it is more recent. In fact, when we encounter someone for the first time and have an instant liking for them or an instant dislike for them, it usually means that we've known that person before, because we have the recognition and we know that there's something that we have to work out with that person. That's just but one example. But in another answer to the question, yes, the soul does make decisions, but for the most part, it waits to see what we're going to do. And when we can act more in concert with the soul and more in concert with the needs of the greater good, then the soul begins to influence us more and more. The soul does have a life on its own plane, but in terms of our personal lives, for the major part, we're just working out the consequences of the choice that we made in the past. In other words, our karma. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. There are more questions. So there is a question coming from Maria Cristina. It's actually there are two questions, so I will post this question in the chat. It would be easier for everyone to comprehend. So here it is. In the book Externalization of the Hierarchy, Decay said around 70 years ago that if the spiritual work was done and if the Great Invocation was used in the correct way, it could reorient the consciousness of humanity, stabilize man in spiritual being, disrupt and rebuild the planetary thought form which men have created in the past. This could be done so rapidly that the needed changes would come about almost overnight, and the race of men could settle down to a life of group goodwill, individual harmlessness, and right human relations. Looking at the world situation today, it seems that this condition was not achieved. What would be your hypothesis for this? Once again, that's a question from Maria Cristina Amaral from Brazil.
Okay. Yes, obviously we're not at that point yet. The Great Invocation is a universal prayer, as we know, a universal invocation. And even though it has been used by millions of people worldwide and continue to be so, as we can see, there are still things to work out. But the thing I would people to recognize is that the conflicts we see are actually in the nature of a, if you want to call it a healing crisis for the planet, in my estimation. They represent really a hopeful sign, because what's happening is the mass consciousness of humanity is progressing at an amazing rate through the internet, through all our interconnectedness, through the educational systems, which unfortunately have been battered a bit in the U.S. and many countries since the Reagan-Thatcher years. But still, people are much more aware than they were even 10 years ago. Billions and billions of people are interconnected at a moment's notice every day. And that's a fact that we cannot really ignore. What that has the possibility for, and what it does actually do, is can rally people in a moment's notice. And what we're seeing, especially with things like the war in Syria, with the other wars around the world, with all the inequalities that we see, is that people are becoming aware of these things and responding to them at a much quicker rate than what they would have done in the past. Now, I don't know exactly when this 70 years comment was written. I don't have that in front of me, but I would imagine that's going to correspond very closely to what we're seeing. The fact of the matter is that we're going to come to a place, and I think very quickly, within the next, I would estimate about 8 to 10 years, that we're going to find the world in a very different situation than what it is now, and I mean that in a more positive sense. We know what can happen if, for instance, there's even a limited nuclear war. I don't even like to use the term. I don't think it's going to happen. I think what we will see is something along the lines of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we were brought to the brink of war, which is where we are now. And the side blinked, basically. What it really meant was that people had better sense than to bring the world into that kind of a war. The world is so interconnected now, so aware, that I don't think anything like that would really happen. And I think that so much pressure is going to be put on world governments over the next 4 or 5 years, especially through things like Brexit, through the referendum that's coming up in Italy, through the elections in the U.S. These are but a few examples, that policies that have brought us to this place are going to be changed, and changed quickly. So I think there's still something to the statement that I think it's just been offset maybe a little bit. I still see much in the way of optimism for the future, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Malvin.
Thank you, Malvin.
Maria Cristina, would you like to add anything, or
No,
to
no.
Malvin's comment?
Just the second question.
Can you voice that question that I wouldn't read it instead of you? Please, go ahead.
Could you put it, please, in the box?
Okay, just a second.
The question, Malvin, is in an unpublished material, DK said that the Aquarian age would start only at the year 2117. If the Aquarian energy is influencing humanity since the year, is it possible that the date is referring actually to the second decade of the age, a decade of around 700 years. Just a curiosity about this.
Well, there are a couple of points to this. From astronomy, we know there's a precession of the equinoxes. And by precession of the equinoxes, the Aquarian age is right around where we are now. DK further says that there are no clear demarcations between signs, and that it takes a while for the energies between the signs to change. This is the sort of energy that we're seeing now, the leaving of the sixth ray, the coming into the seventh. The seventh ray has been in increasing mode for several hundred years now, if memory serves. And I don't recall seeing anywhere that he said that the Aquarian age had started coming in when you had said. The 2117 to me is the 0 point between Pisces and Aquarius, and what we're seeing is the gray area between signs, like the cusp in astrology, like where you have a person who's born very close to Leo or Cancer, for instance, and they exhibit both types of both signs in their nature. It can be a very confusing sort of period, which is what we're seeing now. And I think as the next decades go through, things are going to become much clarified. From the Virgo letter that I wrote, there's a quote in there that says that the intensity of light is increasing very much at the moment. It will reach a maximum up to 2025, and then there will be a period where there is very little added emphasis. This increase in the light is causing a lot of the conflict we see in the world, because basically people don't know what to do with it. A few of us do. We need to keep it coming, but that is what has precipitated a lot of this intense activities that we see and some of the conflict. Getting back to the question, we are moving into the Aquarian. That's evidencing itself now, and it's doing so through the three planets, Venus, Uranus, and Saturn. The Saturn aspect of the Libra decanate is giving us cause to look back over our past actions and to see where we need to make corrections. It's also showing us how past policies have restricted us and that we need to make better choices around that. The Uranian energy is bringing in all the technology with it. Uranus, especially through the Libra decanate and through the Aquarian rulership, has brought in a lot of the technology that we see these days at such an amazing rate. Energy, we see that the nations are finally starting to get the point that you have to cooperate. You can't just go around overthrowing people's governments and ideas of the way you think things should be. So we're rapidly getting to that point. But in final answer to your question, I think the 2117 date is a median date. It's not it's not going to be anything hard and fast. We're not going to see anything spectacular happen at 2117. It's just going to be a continuation and a final sort of finishing for the Pisces is rapidly passing out now. So we're going to have a little bit more extremism here for a while. A lot of ideas still running around for the next few decades, but that's rapidly going to pass out. We're going to become a much more practical and common sort of world, I think. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Malvin. This material, or this affirmation by decay, who has it is Michael. Some letters and papers that were not published. So
yes,
I have
I'm
no
aware.
idea about this.
I'm aware of the. Yeah, I'm aware of the 2117. Yeah, and that would be my take on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as time running, and the nature of Saturn comes to us through that, we're approaching the time where it would be good for us to come to meditation. But before that, I want to just read one more question, which I think would be good lead into meditation for us. It's a question coming from Risa. Can Malvin please explain Libra's soul keynote? I choose the way which leads between the two great lines of force. It is often not understood. Thank you, Risa.
Yeah, that's true. And it comes back to this idea of balancing, balancing the activity levels, balancing our lives, personal lives to start with, to the point where a gentle sort of rhythm can be set up between the personal necessities, which are basically our karma working out, and the new spiritual impulses that seek to come in, that seek to, in a way, mutate ourselves and our world into a better spiritual expression. The two great lines of force, as I said at the beginning of the talk, can represent several things. It can represent the personality in the higher self. It can represent the pairs of opposites. It can represent materialism and spirituality. These are all things that can be taken into account with Libra, and getting back to the idea of law, sex, and money. And there are opposites in all those as well. I mean, we know that sex, for instance, is based on opposites. We know that law is about bringing the persona into line, basically. We know that money is concrete energy, which Uranus and Saturn both have rulership over. The thing to realize in this is that we have to be balanced in the expression of that, meaning that, for instance, money should not be used for selfish purposes, like we see with the obscene accumulation of wealth by the 1%. It should be put toward the immediate need of the public, for instance, for the feeding of children, for the amelioration of suffering, for instance, for scientific discoveries that will enable us to move more freely into the future and to counteract the great damage that we've done to the environment, for instance. This is one aspect of balance. There are many that we could talk about, but the main thing is to travel the narrow path in between the personality and the higher self. This is basically, or the most basic presentation of choosing the line which lies between the two lines of force. The materialistic side on the world today is trying desperately to hold on to the control that is built up through the Piscean interval, or the Piscean age that we've seen. And on the other hand, we're seeking to overthrow the financial interests so that we can have a more just distribution of energy. When we talk about going between the two lines of force, we're talking about just distribution of energy so that neither one or the other has complete sway over our lives. And that's perhaps an important point to make, is that neither one has more importance. They're both important and they both need to be considered. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. So I suggest we now go into meditation. And so please, Malvin, lead us.
Okay. We'll take a few slow, deep breaths. Notice the breath as we do. Noting also that the breath and the mind are one. And that the mind is reflected in the breath. To begin, we visualize ourselves in a field, a beautiful field, with flowers, with running water, on a clear autumn day, with all the people we know, our friends, our family, our enemies, sometimes our greatest teachers. And then as we look out past through those people, we see all the people with whom we're connected, either directly or indirectly, through all our activities. And it gradually becomes a vast field of people. We'll just take a moment to visualize that. We realize then that we're so interconnected with everyone that it's pointless to think of any sort of me or them, any separative thought. We remember the mantra of unification that we said at the beginning of this session, and we get into our hearts. And then, whatever your tradition, we visualize our teacher or teachers sitting on the lotus at the top of our head. The 12-petaled lotus sitting in the middle of the 1,000-petaled lotus. The teacher is smiling. He's happy, or she's happy that we're making the effort. From the heart of the teacher emanates countless streams of light, multicolored light, in all directions. And these lights draw back countless light beings into the field of our vision. The sky, the earth, is filled with light, filled with wisdom, And many of these wisdom beings are dissolved into the heart of the teacher. The teacher then descends into our own hearts through the central channel, through the Sushumna, and sits on the lotus at the heart, facing us. And as we gaze at the teacher, we begin to dissolve into the love the teacher represents. We begin to know the will that the teacher transmits, the greater good that the teacher seeks to serve, and we become with that. And as we do that, our energy fields expand, our aura expands. And as it does, we begin to encompass all these people that we saw before us before. We become indissolubly linked with them through these energy fields. And as we look out, we see that they're all doing the same thing. The light, the love, the energy becomes immense. It fills the space. It goes outward into the world. And through our connections with them, it connects with all the people they know, eventually encompassing the whole world. We'll take a few moments for that. Eventually what we see is everyone interconnected through a countless number of triangles. These encompass the world, these protect the world. They enable light and love to be accessed anywhere. Then from our own hearts we emanate beams of light, multicolored beams of light in all directions, just as our teachers did. And we are again the light beings. When we see that we offer ourselves in our service to the salvation and resurrection of this world and all beings connected with it. We feel that deeply within our being. We know it beyond all doubt. And having realized that, we visualize a shaft of light, the common wisdom of all the countless light beings. And it comes down through our head, through our heart, through our throat chakras, and it beams outward to all the places of darkness and to all beings who cry for help, connecting all beings progressively into tighter and countless triangles of light, encircling the world. And we sound the Om. Om. If you have a mantra you normally recite, you can do so now, which will greatly increase the energy.
I suggest we sound the great invocation.
From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the human minds. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the human hearts. May the coming one return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little human wills, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Then very slowly return to your waking consciousness.
Thank you, Malvin.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for participating today in Moon Meditation. Let's stay connected for the next 5 days in this full moon alignment. And we invite you to join our coming webinars on November 2nd, the Scorpion New Moon webinar, where we will continue our work with the cyclic meditation using the astrological energy of month to meditate on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the next full moon webinar, the Scorpio Solar Festival webinar, will be with Elena Dramcini from Slovakia, and we will focus on the theme of tests and trainings for discipleship. Thank you again. And before we end the webinar today, let's sound together Gayatri. O thou who givest the sustenance to the universe, from whom all things proceed, to whom all things return. Unveil to us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by the disk of golden light, that we may know the truth and do our whole duty as we journey to thy sacred feet.